All right, well, it's 10:30 this morning, and welcome to this podcast. My name is Scott Cameron. I'm one of the historians at the Edison Ford Winter Estates in Fort Myers, Florida. So this morning, we're going to go into a discussion, and the discussion title, of course, as you see on the screen, is the Dodge Brothers. A little bit of background on where this comes from and how this all got started. I came to work at the Edison Estates back in 2022, so 3 years ago, and I was attracted to a couple of things when I first came to work here. The first one was Mr. Edison, of course, and what were the things that I had in common with Edison? And what I found was we were both baseball fans, and he liked to read Sparks page every day, and this was a pretty neat thing. And then I found out that my boss pretty much had the baseball thing under control very well. And I turned to the cars, which is another one of my very passionate things. I'm a diehard car guy. And as I looked around the museum that very first day, I saw all the cars were Fords except for one, and that happened to be a Cadillac. This Cadillac is a Leland model 1906. It's in our museum, and it is a beautiful example of these early automobiles. And I got into the story of the Leland Cadillac and his relationship with Henry Ford. I did some research and wrote a really fun paper on that. And that relationship with Henry and Henry Leland, the two Henrys, we called it. A lot of things that showed me in that paper were that Ford had a lot of help from a lot of people. He was not a real self-starter. And as I describe it when I do my tours, when I talk to people live, Ford had some flaws, and that's all fine and good. We all have those, but I got into more of these flaws and the other people that were involved with Henry Ford, and that drove me to go see my good friend Jim Moss, our auto curator. And Jim clued me in and showed me and taught me a lot about the Ford cars that are here in the museum. And of course, we have three Model Ts on the property, and the Model T being Henry's big deal. That was the car, probably still the most famous car ever built. But this was a late car for Henry Ford. He started out with a lot of other things. And going back through the research, again, what I found was, excuse me, Henry had a lot of help from a lot of people. And two guys that really pop into Henry's background and his history. And I really think my contention when I did this paper was if it wasn't for Horace and John Dodge, Ford as we know it today may not even exist. So that was the thesis idea I went into this paper with. And as we go through this discussion, talking about the Dodge brothers, we're going to get into their relationship with Ford and how they did that. And maybe when we get to the end of this, some of you who are watching or that view in later on will agree with me. Some will disagree. And that's all fine and good. That's a discussion, and that's what we're looking for. So let's get into this Dodge brothers, and we'll talk a little bit about the boys. So as I said, during my early time here, I am a car guy. I like the cars. I'm a car nut, and this is what stirred my interest on these fellas. And the contention one more time, would we have Ford today? So John Francis and Horace Elgin Dodge, that's the guys we're going to talk about, and very, very, very neat guys. Their early years, the boys were born in Niles, Michigan. Their father was their grandfather had a steam engine shop. Later on, their father took that shop over, and the boys worked in the shop. They started working in there as young men and became very, very adept and very adapted, and they're very good at what they were doing. And this working in that machine shop early is the driving force that pretty much is going to define their lives. Now, they were born 4 years apart, and everybody knew that they were born apart, but a lot of people thought that they were actually twins, which becomes a very interesting fact with them as we go through this. When John graduated from high school in 1882, the family moved away from Niles, made a few stops, and they ended up in Detroit, and their connection to Niles went away. Later on in their lives, they're going to go back to Niles, try to do something philanthropic for the city. By that time, their family home was gone. And today, there's just a reminder, historical note on the ground there where their family home was in Niles, and that was put up by the state there. Now, their early business, the early sources of work, they're going to play with bicycles. Bicycles being the mode of transportation that was the big deal in the 1870s into the 80s. And the bicycle, the big front wheel, the little back wheel. And the boys were known, they built one of these out of used carriage parts, the wagon wheel on the front, a carriage wheel on the back. They actually built one of these, and we know they did this because there's articles about them terrorizing the people as they rode it around the streets of the town. Now, that twin connection that I mentioned earlier pops up here. And as they got to be older, a lot of people thought that they were twins. They looked very much alike. And later on in life, they do some very odd things. And one of the things they did was they actually even dressed alike. And, this is kind of something people do today with, if you have twins, you dress them in the same outfits. But when they get to be about teenagers today, that's over and they don't want that anymore. But these guys continued to do that. And this whole twins thing went so far as later on in their careers, if they got mail and it wasn't addressed to both brothers, they wouldn't even open the mail. Didn't get past the secretary. Now, their first job when they got to Detroit in 1896 or in 1886, they go to work across the river in Windsor, Ontario, at the Murphy Boiler Company. And Murphy hired both of them. And this was kind of an insistence thing. He got John for $16.50 a week and Horace for $13.50 a week, which is kind of fun when you think about today's minimum wage. But what John told him was, we're brothers and we always work together. If you haven't got room for two of us, neither of us will start. And that's that. So they both got hired. Now, Walter Griffiths was an apprentice there at the plant. And he recalled when John and Horace came to work there, Piper was the guy that hired them and told them, come to work on Monday. Well, Griffith recalled that John was more aggressive, more hardworking. Horace went by the name of Ed, and Horace maybe not the name he really wanted to use. And one thing he noted now was that they began drinking heavily on the weekends in various taverns around Detroit. And they seldom got in fights or trouble because they stayed with each other apart from others. But that's not going to really continue to happen very well for them as we get into the story. 1892, John married for the first time. He was the first of the brothers to marry. He married Ivy Hawkins. Ivy and John had 3 children together. The Dodge family, later after the boys are gone, these folks, these children, Winifred, Isabel, John Duvall, they're going to become part of that magazine thing where everybody's trying to dig up the dirt on all the people in high society, and they were involved in a lot of that tabloid stuff of the day back then. And John married a few years later. He actually married in 1896. John's wife or Horace's wife, excuse me, was a piano teacher, and Horace was a big music lover. He did a lot of things with music and he was really into that. Their 2 children were Delphine and Horace Jr. And those 2 children, again, later on in life, they fall into that same high society tabloid thing. Now, in 1892, they were working across the river and they moved to the Canadian Typography Company. And that company did printing, but they had a sideline business, backroom business, if you will, of bicycle manufacturing. In 1896, Horace patented a dust-proof 4-point adjustable ball bearing system that worked on the bicycle. And he's going to share credit with this with his brother John because they shared everything, being as close as they were. But this is a revolutionary thing for the bicycle industry. Bicycles in that day were driven on dirt roads, dirt streets, and the dust would get into the bearing systems. They would seize up, and you could very easily go head over handlebars without even knowing when your axle systems and your bearing systems froze up. So John got this developed and designed, and they went into business with another man in the business, Mr. Evans, and they started the Evans and Dodge Bicycle Company, the E&D. And this bicycle is really well received, very happily taken in by the bicycle community in those days. Bicycle racing was a big deal, and these bicycle racing organizations really fell in love with the new Evans and Dodge because it didn't have that tendency to seize up. And as you can see by the picture, the Evans and Dodge bicycle now looks more like what we would consider a modern bicycle today. But this thing had a 98% efficiency, giving them 20 inches to 3 feet of pedal to wheel ratio, and was geared 80% as opposed to the 7-inch cranks in the other bicycles. Two of the Toronto bicycle clubs tested this thing, and especially in the uphill climbs, they said it was very, very efficient, very, very good. And in this being so well taught, they sold through their entire stock in the first year. Now, Evans and Dodge, they patent this thing, they get it going, and it's very successful until 1899. In 1899, the Canadian Cycle Motor Company was buying up all their competition. They were buying up every bicycle company in Canada that they could find, and they eventually get to the Dodge brothers, Evans and Dodge, and they buy them out. Now, the point here with the slide, I always like to point this out. When you get a stamp, an official stamp postage, I think your invention's probably a pretty big deal, and they did get that in Canada. Now, when they sold out to the Canadian Cycle Motor Company, they took part of their buyout in the machinery. They took the machinery that they were using in the plant and they moved it across the road, across the river, back to Detroit, where they started their first machine shop. This is the Dodge Brothers Machine Shop on Boydell Building. That building still exists in Detroit, a little more modern, updated today. But this is their first machine shop, and they start into the business of machinists on their own. And their first contracts are about stoves. Stoves are a really big deal in Detroit at the time with all the iron ore in Michigan. It's being delivered to Detroit, stoves being a major manufacturing source there. Jeremiah Dwyer was the stove guy, if you will, in those days. He had the Detroit Stove Company and later the Michigan Stove Company, and the Dodge brothers contracted to him building stoves. The interesting point here being that 10% of all the stoves sold in the entire world were made in the city of Detroit. So this was a really big business going on in that time. Now, Ivy Hawkins passed away, John's wife. She's gone in 1901. John's mother stepped in to become a caretaker for his three children and found out that she needed a lot of help. So Horace's wife, his brother, had a friend named Belle, and Belle moved in to assist John's mother, and she becomes the household, the Alice of the Brady Bunch type person. She's taking care of the kids, kind of taking care of mom, and that's going to go along pretty good. And John starts dating his secretary, Matilda Rausch. They hired Matilda. John started dating her, and later on, he's going to marry Ivy Hawkins. And Matilda Rausch was way out of the picture here. And this whole marriage thing lasted a very short time. Ivy left him for fooling around, and he married Matilda, but nobody knew that he had done that until the 1980s. It all finally came out that many years later. So 1901 was their first venture into the automobile industry, and picture of Detroit in 1901 with no cars in sight, probably not an unusual thing because they were just getting started. Now, these early automobile pioneers that were out there in the late 1800s began making their way into the business. Charles and Frank Duryea were the first Americans to build a successful automobile and the first to incorporate an American business expressly made for the building of automobiles and selling them to the public. And later on, they're followed by some more of these early car guys. One of my favorites is a man named Ransom Olds. He started the Olds Motor Vehicle Company in 1897, a year before Ford started his Detroit Automobile Company. By 1901, Olds had built 11 prototype vehicles, and they were running on steam, electricity, and gasoline. He was covering all three of the bases. 1901, his plant burned down, and the only car to survive the fire was one of his curved dash Oldsmobiles. Now, we also give Ransom Olds the credit for developing the first stationary assembly line. Not to be confused with Ford's moving assembly line later. Ransom's assembly line did not move the car to the part, it moved the part to the car. So Olds had to go to New York, or he went to New York. He went to the car show there, and he cut a contract to sell 1,000 cars to a dealer in New York. And in the meantime, his plant burned down, and he really needed help. So he turned to two companies in town. He went to the two machinists in town he thought he could trust and who would do the job for him. One of them was Ransom Olds, and Ransom Olds had Leland and Faulkner at that time. And he also went to the Dodge brothers. Ransom Olds needed machinists to build to get him back on ground so that he could sell those 1,000 cars, build the cars that he had contracted to, and hold his word for that. Leland, Faulkner, and the Dodge brothers were the key for them. They were able to step in and provide him with the help he needed. After the fire, desperate for help, he goes to these guys, and the Dodge brothers agree to sell him 3,000 transmissions. And they upsized their plant. They put a workforce together. They built the transmissions. They were very reliable. They're well built. They're very precise. And this does the trick for ransom olds. And the Dodge brothers start to gain a quality reputation for the quality of their work and for the speed at which they can do so. Well, Ransom Olds got back on his feet, moved on and started Rio, and the boys were looking for another opportunity. And this is when they run into Henry Ford. Henry Ford, 1903. The brothers have an established shop. Ransom has gone back home. But when they meet with Ford, they know this guy, and his reputation really is not the best in Detroit. He's in a new venture with Alexander Malcolmson, the money guys behind Ford's new thing. And this is his third attempt at the automobile business. And it's the financial situation that he brings to the table that worries the Dodges when they meet. So a little bit about Henry Ford. Now, this comes out of one of my other presentations, but you need a little background here for how this all came about. They met in 1903. But in 1896, Ford built his quadricycle, his first automobile in the little woodshed behind his house on Begley Street. And again, Ford, with his flaws, when it wanted to drive the car, it didn't fit out the door, had to actually knock the door of the shed down, knock down the bricks to get out and go for a ride. Now, at that time, he was working as an engineer at the Detroit Illuminating Company, which happened to be owned by Thomas Edison. Now, that position gets him invited to New York in 1896 in August, and he met Edison. Now, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of research out there about what happened when Edison and Ford met, but we're pretty convinced that Edison told Ford, this electric car that I work on might not work as well as we would like it to. The batteries are big, they're heavy, they don't recharge well, and of course, the extension cord doesn't work. But the Ford's car is a two-cylinder gas-powered motor, and it's self-contained. You just put gas in it. And Henry Ford talks to Edison about this, and Edison's inspiration to Ford, Henry, this thing that you have built is self-contained. It probably will work. You've done a good job. I think you can do better. The inspiration was, Henry, get in the car business. You can do this. And Henry did that. He went back to Detroit, and 2 years later, in 1899, he met with William Murphy, and they formed the Detroit Automobile Company. Murphy being the money guy and Ford the engineer with the ideas. Now, one of the things that Ford was problematic with was he could build a car, but he could only build one car at a time. And after making literally no cars other than a couple of racing machines, Ford and Murphy come back in for the we need to talk moment, and Ford reorganizes with Murphy and their discussion. We're going to reorganize the company. We're going to put it back together, change the name to the Henry Ford Automobile Company, cash in marketing, merchandising on the name Henry Ford that he had made while racing. It was winning races, so he had a name, and he's very, very famous, very popular in Detroit. So they changed the name for the marketing aspect, and it didn't work out. Ford still isn't into this mass production thing. So they bring Henry Leland into the company. Henry Leland is another engineer. He was part of that deal with Oldsmobile and the Dodge brothers a couple years earlier. And he was very established, and he understood mass production, and he understood precision. And Leland wanted to build a car that was very precise, measured within 1/10,000th of an inch. All the parts were interchangeable, which was an absolute incredible idea in the day. All the parts were made the same, so if something broke, you just switched a part out, interchangeable parts. And he and Ford did not see eye to eye. Ford wanting to build a very inexpensive car, how fast and how quick. Basically, what Ford wanted to build was a Volkswagen, a popular car that everybody could afford. But Leland wants to build something better. Murphy went with Leland. In 1902, he paid Ford $900 to go away, take your name in your car, and he and Leland started 1902 Cadillac. And this is again, same guy, the same ransom holds. He now is Murphy and Leland. They are Cadillac, and Cadillac goes on to do its own thing. Later on, it'll become Lincoln. And that, again, that's a Henry Leland story. But of course, Henry Ford ends up with Lincoln in 1919. So Dodge Brothers enter into this contract with Henry Ford. That's the background, and they decide, all right, we're gonna do this. We're gonna build 650 chassis. That's the engine, the transmission, the axles. Put it on a frame, and we're gonna deliver that for $250 each. They hire in some more guys. Now have 150 men working at Hastings Street. Both plants are going, and the issue was cash on the barrelhead. They told Ford that we'll build it, we get paid when we deliver. And that's what their initial contract called from. And it also stated that non-payment could result in ownership rights. Just a couple months later, it happened. Ford owes the Dodge brothers $7,000, and payment came due. Ford and Malcolmson did not have the funds to pay up, and that results in a visit from the Dodge brothers to the board being Malcolmson and the guys with the money. They're looking for their $7,000. And their reputation at this time in town has already started to get more of that, the brawler type car builder thing. They like to drink and they like to fight. That's all there was to it. And I don't think this is two guys you want knocking on your door wanting their $7,000. But in this meeting, Ford gets involved, and the way it comes out is we owe you $7,000, but we need another $3,000. And the brothers sat back, took a flyer on this, and wrote a check for $3,000. Ford now owed them 10 grand. And for that $10,000, they accepted 100 shares of stock in a new Ford Motor Company that was incorporated on the 16th of June in 1903. They're now owners and investors in Ford. They own 10%. And John Dodge became vice president of Ford. Someone's got to keep their finger on the pulse of the money. So Ford grew very, very quickly. 1905, the boys were supplying 400 rigs every month. At the end of the first year, the dividends are paid. Their dividend the first year was $9,800. So they basically, at the end of one year, got their $10,000 back. This is a really big deal. This is also the year of the Model N. One of the Ford has progressed and progressed, and this influx of dividend money, along with the profits that they made selling the rigs to Ford, who could now pay for them in actuality, this puts the brothers in perfect position. They're building the rig, getting paid for those, and they're going to get paid in dividends every single year. Now, Dodge took off just as fast as Ford did. They needed a bigger plant. They moved to Monroe Avenue. They're employing 130 men there. Even back in 1901, the Detroit Free Press said the Dodge brothers had one of the most thoroughly equipped and up-to-date plants in the city. They were the guys when you need a machinist. And when this partnership came together, Ford started making claims that he owned the Dodge brothers, and they took exception to that. And that conversation ended very, very quickly. Dodge was Dodge, Ford was Ford. They were the supplier, Ford was the builder and put her together. And in 1909, they actually ended up buying more space down a few blocks away at Rivard, and Dodge is growing really fast. By 1906, they were sitting very, very well financially. They both had nice homes, they had families. They started getting interested in boats and racing boats. Horace is pretty settled, and John's wife left him. He remarried. All that stuff went on with them. And the boys are doing really good. On the business side, though, Ford's starting to look at how do we get rid of all these investors and get control of everything? And he starts planning to start building all the different things that he needed in his own plants. And this is where it actually started way back in 1906. So again, their prominence. 1910, they've expanded. The pictures show us the two homes the Dodge brothers had. This is when John also married Matilda Roush, and that was very secret and hush hush, and nobody found out about till 1980. But their hard drinking and hard fighting reputations closed a lot of doors. They really wanted to be involved in the Detroit society. Horace contributes to the Detroit sympathy, and he builds the orchestra hall that still stands in Detroit today. They're really trying to buy their way in, and they're really trying to do things to be part of that high society in Detroit. And their reputation, those other guys just really didn't want to be running around or hanging with the Dodge brothers. They're hard drinking, hard fighting, just got way ahead of them. We know that there's one report in newspapers in 1911. John Dodge and his friend Robert Oakman beat up a handicapped attorney, a gentleman named Thomas Mahone, in Schneider's bar, and Mahone sued, but he dropped the suit. Most likely because John went to him immediately afterwards, sobered up, and made restitution and got that dropped. But it doesn't stop with John. Later on, he came out of a bar one night. He's trying to start his Ford crank car, and he couldn't get it started. And some gentleman standing on the sidewalk started making fun of him, so he just knocked him out. So this is the while the reputation came. They didn't fit that high society very proper mold. Horace had his own little temper thing. He started a bar one night. There was a newspaper man in there, the old guy that owned the newspaper, and Horace knew that, and he threatened to kill him if he reported it. But that gets washed away later on. Restitution is made. But the one that I found that I thought to be the most hilarious was they applied to be members at the Grosse Pointe Country Club, big time country club in Detroit, and they were denied. They said, no, we don't want you guys. So John went across the street, bought a big chunk of property, built a house and a building on it, and the building had a 12-car garage where he could work on cars just loud enough to interrupt the golf course. If you know anything about golfers, you do know they like their quiet and their solitude. So this is the reputation that gets built on. And actually, if you look back on it in those days, I think these guys would have probably been a lot of fun to hang around with. So 1910, Hamtramck. The brothers paid $100,000 for the property Hamtramck. This is actually a small city that's completely surrounded by Detroit. It's populated by the Polish population in those days, the immigrants that were coming over. The plant cost them about $750,000, was 300,000 square feet, 2 500-watt generators. They use forced air for heating and cooling, very modern plant for its day. Their production, 40,000 transmissions, 220,000 rear axles, and 190,000 front axles. Meanwhile, across town, Ford started building the Highland Park plant, expanding his capabilities again. He's still looking at how to get complete control of Ford and get rid of all the other stockholders. By this time, he's gotten rid of even Malcolmson. So 1912, 1913, the writing's on the wall there for the Dodge brothers. Ford's new plant's going to be able to do what the Dodge brothers do, and they can see that they're going to get squeezed. So they did go to an advertising firm. Actually, the advertising firm came and said, why don't you guys build your own car? You have the reputation. You build a great thing. You should build your own car. And they were very reluctant to do it because they just didn't really want to get into that whole car business with the selling and the marketing and all that. But the writing on the wall, Ford finally forced their hand. In 1914, they broke from Ford and they started building cars under the Dodge name. And they went from building suppliers to builders. So 1914, they retooled the Hamtramck plant. All new machineries brought in. They brought in body parts for stamping, machinery to do that. The office staff gets expanded. The plant even had a test track. The cars would roll out of the top end of the picture, out of the plant up there where the sign is. They would actually drive up over this huge hill, down around the track, and this was all done before they ever sold a car. Every car was tested on the test track, and I don't think that's even close to being done today. But this retooling cost them $500,000, but they're in perfect position to do this. All the money they've made working for Ford did not finance it. They paid for it. And that's a really huge thing in those days. That's a lot of money in the 1910s. Now, their staffing goes from about 5,000 people to over 7,000 people in that 1 year from 1914 to 1915. And when they launched Dodge, being a car guy, and I always like to explain this car guy thing, Uh, in the country today, there are three kind of car guys. There are Ford guys, Mopar guys, and GM guys. And there's always been that competition ever since 1928 when the big three started. But there's always been that thing. But the thing that John Dodge said that just caught my eye and really was kind of the impetus for doing this paper when he launched Dodge, he said, think of all the Ford owners who would like to own an automobile. So there you have it. There's the dig and there's the gouge. Thank you, John Dodge. So they went out and they got some help. They started raiding some of the other companies. Actually, they got a man named Irving Phillip from Studebaker, and with Dodge Brothers' reputation, no real car to start. Phillip brought in Theodore McManus as an advertising manager, and Henry Robbins comes in for international sales. McManus came up with a really interesting fact and a really interesting idea. All they said in their advertising when they first started it in about 1913 was Dodge. They just put out Dodge. And that later becomes increased to Dodge automobiles. And now everybody's got the idea Dodge is going to build their own car. And this is going to be a really good car. People believed that. The Dodge brothers, their reputation was there. They built the good stuff. So they developed this strategy and they're ready to go on day one. They started rolling out cars. The plan worked. There were actually 21,000 applicants to become Dodge dealers before they ever opened. And a lot of those guys were actually Ford dealers. And they wanted to become Dodge dealers either in addition to or instead. Sidney Cheney came to Michigan and he wanted a piece of this action too. Sidney was from Australia and he finally he badgers his way in with Theodore McManus and becomes the general sales manager. And a lot of the early cars for Ford or for Dodge, their exports went to Australia. So the first Dodge came out. The Model 30 rolled off the line, first one, November 14th, 1914, very late in the year. But this is an incredibly good car. All steel body. The body was built by the Budd Company. This is revolutionary, all steel. Inline, four-cylinder L-head engine developed, 35 horsepower, 110-inch wheelbase with a three-speed transmission, electric start, and a speedometer. This was available 56-inch track or 60-inch track wheelbase. Sold this car for $795. And in that first month and a half, they sold 249 cars. Now, again, Ford was not a competitor to the Dodge brothers. They were building a car that was much better than his Model T. Two different markets. Ford is building the Model T. 110-inch wheelbase. It's only 20 horsepower, but it sells for $440. He's got the car that he wants. 1914, the assembly line starts. Ford starts building millions and millions of Model Ts. Dodge brothers, they're going to do the same thing, but they're going to do it with a different car, a better car, a little more expensive car. Now, Dodge, the success was instant. It really was. They sold 279 cars in the first 6 weeks. The next year, they sold 44,000 cars. Eventually, they're going to get all the way up to 145,000 cars in 1 year. The down year in 1918, World War I going on, so keep that in mind. So the first possession, December 14th, 1914, and they just did really good stuff all the way till 1920. Now, in the midst of all this new production, they get started, Dodge takes off, they're doing very well. And there's another little squiggle between the brothers and Henry Ford. In 1916, Henry went to the stockholders that remained and said, we're not going to pay any dividends in 1916 for the year. We're going to take all that money and put it into the new plant at Highland Park. And the Dodge brothers took a pretty great exception to that. The day after Edsel's wedding, Edsel being Henry's son, of course, the day after his wedding, the Dodge brothers took Ford to court and sued him for failure to pay the dividends. Now, it takes about 3 years, it takes till 1919 for this to all be settled. But when it was, the Dodge brothers won their suit and they were awarded $1.9 million in dividends for the year 1916. To give you an idea how much money they were actually making by then. This ruling found that the corporation was obligated to provide for the shareholders, not for the company. And this litigation today still studied in a lot of law schools. This was a major thing back during those early years of industrialization and before the unionization movement gets involved in. But who's really supposed to get paid? This is still studied. So pretty interesting lawsuit. Now, 1916, World War I was on the horizon, but we had a little problem going on in the United States down on the Mexican border. Pancho Villa was running around down there raiding the Mexican-U.S. border. And there was a gentleman that most of you probably heard of named Lieutenant George Patton down there chasing Pancho Villa and his guys around. And what Patton was running into was his horses wouldn't hold up to the Mexican bandits' horses. And it just became problematic. They're just chasing them from spot to spot, never catching anybody. And Patton came up with the idea, maybe we should try these automobiles. So they got a bunch of Dodge trucks and Dodge cars, and they brought them down onto the border. And Patton used those on an attack in Chihuahua and recaptured Julio Cardenas, one of Villa's important lieutenants. And these bandits were rounded up. The horses were outrun by the Dodge automobiles. And this action really just incites the whole mobilization of military. The horse, this is the beginning of the horses done for the military in those days. And it expanded quickly. Pershing, who was Patton's commander, he saw how good this worked. He ordered Dodge cars and trucks, 250 of them. Those were actually loaded up and they were sent with the American Expeditionary Forces going to France. And that's where the diversion goes. So the Dodge cars and trucks went to war with General Pershing and George Patton, 1916. During that war, Dodge sent over and built 8,100 touring cars, 175 roadsters, 40 sedans, 2,600 commercial vehicles. The big one was the 1,000 chassis, and they just sent the chassis that were used for hauling and light trucks and repairs and so forth, and 1,000 ambulances. Ambulances were probably the most prevalent vehicle you saw on the battlefront during World War I. Dodge made them. Ford Model Ts were used. A lot of different manufacturers. Ambulances were in desperate need there, and a lot of Dodge trucks were used in that service. A lot of them stayed in Europe after the war. In fact, most of them did. And one of the things that came out of this was the mechanics who worked on the Dodge truck said, these are great. They're easy to work on. They're well praised. And aside from the simplicity of the Model T, the Dodge truck, very easy to work on. The other thing that they got involved in was some ordnance. The French were producing a couple of howitzers, a 105 millimeter howitzer, huge gun, and they couldn't produce enough of them. So they turned to the United States and got into some negotiation with the Dodge brothers, and they wanted to send their engineers to show the Dodge brothers how to build this recoil system for their cannon. The Germans actually captured some of these cannons, tried to back engineer them. They couldn't even duplicate it. It was that intricate. And Germans, known for their mechanics, that says something about how complicated this thing was. But the Dodge brothers turned down the help from the French company, said, we don't need your guys over here. Just send us the blueprints. They did that. They sent the blueprints. The brothers built on their own a $10 million ordnance plant. They equipped it, built it, and they started rolling out these cannons, and they worked perfectly. Their contention was they wanted no government interference in military plants and in any kind of industrial stuff, even in today's. If you build something, the government guy sticks his nose in, and the next day you're making changes. The brothers didn't want to have anything to do with that. They said, we're going to build it, and because we don't want your interference, we want zero profit. So they built these guns at zero profit to themselves after building the $10 million plant. So I think this is a very patriotic move on their part. The employees at Dodge, after the war, well, we find that the employees were always valued at Dodge. They took care of their people. They were not keen on the unionization, and they knew that if they took care of their people, they probably wouldn't have to deal with that. And they did things. In 1919, they purchased a life insurance, a health and life insurance policy for every employee, and they paid for it. They said that in appreciation for your loyalty and commitment, we present you with this certificate of life insurance, our expression of goodwill. We assume the entire cost for this insurance and ask only in return that you continue to do your part in maintaining that spirit of loyalty and spirited cooperation so necessary for our common welfare. Not bad. The policy was a sliding scale based on the longevity, and as long as you worked for the brothers, as long as you worked for Dodge, you had that life insurance, and it was paid for. They're also known for those hot days in the plant in Detroit. And having been an auto plant before, in the summertime, it's hot. I can guarantee you that. And what they were known for was beer and sandwiches at lunchtime for the entire plant staff. A couple guys that like to drink beer, they're showing up for the plant guys too. So there you have some fun with Dodge. The company continues to be very, very successful. 1915, their net profits, $268,000. By 1920, their net profits, $18 million. And that boils out to almost $6 billion in today's money. So as you can see by this chart, the Dodge brothers absolutely, positively, financially successful from the very beginning of their automobile business. During the peak of their wealth, they started spending some money and then starting to enjoy their lives pretty much too. They finally in 1919 sold out to Henry Ford. They sold them their 10%. They were done with Henry in 1919. What they sold that for, $25 million in that day's money. So back to that chart, we're talking about $6 billion that they returned when they sold Ford the rights, their 10%. Now, they're enormous wealth. They spent a lot of money. And Horace's spending was on the Delphine. The Delphine was his yacht and his new play toy. John went out and he ordered a 104-foot cruiser. They're building these great mansions in Grosse Pointe near Rose Terrace. And very sadly, they never saw these things to completion. The Delphine today, still out there. I understand it's not in great shape, but it's in the Mediterranean somewhere at this time. And it was actually used during World War II by our Navy. That Delphine was commissioned, and sadly, Horace never did see it launch. It wasn't launched till 21, but his daughter christened the ship, and that's who it was named for, his daughter Delphine. 250 feet long, 58 feet long, 35-foot beam, 26 passengers, and a crew of 24. So this really excellent yacht, excellent seagoing craft. And then we know that the Yalta Accords that were signed by Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill at the end of World War II, that was done sitting aboard the Delphine. January 22nd of 1920, the brothers headed to New York for the auto show. And as soon as they got there, right after they got there, within a few days, John had contracted influenza. This is the pandemic of 1919. He was too weak to attend luncheon. He never recovered with this, and he passed within a week. Horace by his side. Horace also the effects of this Spanish flu, this pandemic of those days, but he stayed by his brother's side. When John passed, the funeral was in Detroit. There were all the city's elite came, including Henry Leland and James Couzens, who was one of those early investors in the Ford Motor Company with the brothers when they did that. But Henry Ford and Edsel would not attend. Later in the year, in August, John suffered a relapse. He moved to his home down in Palm Beach, Florida. He was trying to recover, but the flu contributing with the cirrhosis of the liver that he was also affected with, that was his demise, and he passed on December 10th in 1920. So both brothers are gone within just a few months of each other. Again, huge funeral, lots of people from town. But the biggest thing with both of these funerals, the people in the plant, the guys that worked in the plants, all attended the funeral. Hundreds of those came to pay their respects when the boys passed. Their philanthropy, just touching on that briefly here, the Detroit Patriotic Fund, the Salvation Army, the Boy Scouts, they gave very, very generously. Horace was basically the donor that gave the city of Detroit the Detroit Opera Hall that is shown here, the Orchestra Hall, and that building's still there. People, they still perform there. So their philanthropic efforts through their whole careers, always out there and very generous gentlemen. Now, When the boys passed, when the brothers were gone, the family inherited the business. And the problem was they had no idea what the brothers were doing. They ran that business very close to their chest, very tight-fisted. Everything, all the decisions were done by them, pretty much them alone. And the family turned to an estate business and an investment firm, and they said, "We need help running this. It only takes a couple years." And that company cannot do what the Dodge brothers were doing. And they recommend to the family, to the heirs, the two wives, just sell it. And they did. In 1928, they sold Dodge to Walter Chrysler. He added Dodge to his conglomeration. At that time was Chrysler, Plymouth, and DeSoto, and he renamed it Dodge. And that's where the big three starts in 1928. We get Dodge, Chrysler, Plymouth, General Motors, and of course, the Ford Company. So that is the end of the presentation. And as I said early on, the brothers rose. They were very poor young men. They became multimillionaires. They're not twins, but they certainly lived their lives like a couple of them. And they spent all their time together. They built a reputation and a couple of great engineers, and they built an incredibly great company. They did not plan for the future very well, but their name survives. Dodge still out there today, and Dodge still making some great cars. So that is the end of this presentation. And as I said up front, if you agree with me, would we have Ford today without Dodge? I'd like to hear them. If you ever send them comments in, that is how we get things. And I'd love to hear those things. And those of you who have stepped in today and listened and watched, I appreciate you being here. The presentation will be loaded up onto YouTube under our Edison Ford digital discussions there, and that should be up here within the next couple of days. We'll get that put together for you. If you want to review this or come back at it, it will be on YouTube. We'll look forward to seeing your views there. And that is it, everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning, and have a wonderful day.